Good evening, everybody. My name is William Strange. I have the honor to be the Camross Felcourt Professor of Urban Economics here at Rotman. I am also the director of the David Feldman Center for Real Estate and Urban Economics. This event tonight is jointly hosted by the Feldman Center and by the ULI. Thank you all for coming. Thank you extra much for coming given the hard weather that we are all dealing with. Before we begin, we wish to acknowledge the land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. The context of today's event is the affordability of housing. There are many things that contribute to the affordability of housing. We are focusing on one of them, which is the productivity of construction activity. Housing is important to the economy because living somewhere is important to the economy. But as we will see in today's event, productivity more generally is going to be related to productivity in housing, so it matters for that reason as well. So today's event is going to describe the parameters of the productivity issue, as well as how it could be fixed and who might take actions to fix it and what those actions would be. Before we do that, though, I would like to introduce our speakers. Brad Carr, CEO of Mattamy Homes Canada since 2018, oversees the company's full home building life cycle across major markets, including the GTA, Ottawa, Calgary, and Edmonton. Leading a team of over 1,400 people, he focuses on creating innovative communities and delivering an exceptional homeowner experience. Julie DiLorenzo, President and CEO of Mirabella Development Corporation, is one of North America's most accomplished real estate developers, leading major projects since founding her firm in 1982. She has built a legacy of excellence across all aspects of development, from planning to construction, while evolving Mirabella into a premier multidisciplinary firm known for its innovation, technical expertise, and timeless design. Nung Nguyen, CEO of Horizon Legacy, is transforming the long-standing company into a leader in construction technology and robotics, drawing on 15+ years of experience delivering major infrastructure and renewable energy projects. She is pioneering Canada's first large-scale neighborhood built with on-site robotics and has led national initiatives, including the Construction Automation Lab, to advance robotics, address labor shortages, and inspire the next generation of builders. Now, you will notice there are two people who I haven't introduced yet. That is because this event will be different than most events we have here. This event is going to be led by students who will be questioning the panel about these crucial productivity issues. On the other side of the stage, I have two fantastic students, Parsa Bondar Sahebi and Joyce Luo, who will lead the panel discussion. Now, I hope that, I believe that since you have sacrificed by showing up here at the school on such a foul day as we have been experiencing, you get to have questions too. Questions that occur to you during the panel discussion should be submitted to slido.com, that's slido.com, entering the code hashtag Rotman Events, which is found on the far side of the floor. The instructions are located on the monitor next to me. Towards the end of the panel, two more fantastic students. Well, I don't mean more fantastic. I mean two other fantastic students. All of my students are wonderful. Jean-Luc Cinq-Mars and Samuel Khalifa will join us on stage to ask the panelists your questions. So if you have follow-up that you want to have, go for it. If you want to disagree with us, go for it twice. We want this event to be as stimulating as it can possibly be, and your participation will help to do that. We would like you to use your phone to submit questions. Of course, we would prefer not to use your phone to take incoming calls during the event, so please silence it if you might do that. Okay, we're set and ready to go. Parsa and Joyce, please begin with the initial questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor, for that introduction. So hi, everyone. Thank you for coming here tonight. My name is Parsa. I'm the president of Rodman Real Estate Association. Today I'm here with Joyce, my colleague, and we are very grateful to have this opportunity to have a meaningful discussion on the challenge of productivity tonight. Just before I start, I want to do a specification about the questions. So if you have a question and you want to direct it at a specific individual, please include that in the question when you're submitting the question. Thank you. Now, to start the discussion, I first want to ask our guests to frame this challenge first. So we have seen some recent studies that suggest total factor productivity in the construction sector has stagnated and declined for many years. So my question is, based on your experience, do you believe there is a real productivity challenge in Canada, or do you think this narrative is overstated? So to start this, Will, please, let's start with you.
Thank you, Parsa. As I said a second ago, housing is expensive for a whole bunch of reasons. We're going to focus on one particularly important reason, the productivity of the construction sector. This has been a topic of a number of recent studies. To start things off, I'm going to present a couple of figures from a paper by Goolsbee and Syverson from the NBER. I'm giving you the full citation both because I'm an academic geek and because some of you might want to look it up and see what they're doing. These are super credible economists. I completely believe that they have done the best they could to give us credible numbers on these questions. My goal here is to provide numbers, provide context for the rest of this event, and then, as much as I can, shut up and let the people who know much more than I do to my right talk about what can actually be done to solve these problems. But let me show you a troubling picture. This is a US picture, but it's better in some ways than the Canadian picture to look at. And sadly, the Canadian story is just about the same. What does this picture show us? You see two lines at the top of the picture, a blue one and a gray one. They describe manufacturing, and they describe two measures of productivity. The blue one describes value added per worker. So this is basically what an economist would call the average product of labor. So it's how productive your labor is. The gray one is called total factor productivity. And total factor productivity is what you get beyond all of your inputs. So double all your inputs, what extra productivity you have, that residual is called total factor productivity. And I'm not sure if you can see the years at the bottom, but this goes quite a way back. What this shows is that the productivity, total factor productivity and worker productivity rise in manufacturing. Since 1970, the number in the US is about 90%, and in Canada, it might be 65% or something like that. The reason we're using manufacturing as a benchmark is that that is also an industry like construction that involves taking materials and processing them into something different. How does the picture look for construction? Well, at first it looks good, arguably even better than it looks for manufacturing. These are the orange, the yellow, and the red line. So in the 40s and 50s, we see lots of increase in productivity in construction. What's that? That's the kind of development we saw out in the suburbs in Scarborough, where people realized that by building a whole bunch of houses all at once, you could take advantage of scale economies and do it in a relatively cost-effective way. And Toronto was an affordable city to live in that era. But around 1970, something changes. Manufacturing productivity keeps going up. Construction productivity doesn't rise at all. And the Canadian data shows exactly the same thing. So we have production, inputs no more productive than they used to be. And this is like a whole half a point off of national productivity growth across the whole economy. Like the whole economy might grow a couple % a year. We are growing significantly more slowly than we would if construction productivity behaved like manufacturing productivity. Now here's another picture. It's a lot messier, but it also tells the same grim story. In this case, instead of looking at value added like in the first picture, we look at how many housing units, how much square footage of housing you get per worker. What this picture shows is the same thing. We're not seeing increases in productivity in housing. Now, these figures pose several related questions that are incredibly important for Canada in addressing our economic challenges that we are all now facing. Why has productivity improved so little in construction? Who can fix this? How can it be fixed? The rest of this session is going to address these issues. That's about all I need to say by way of context, Farsad. I hope that's useful.
Thank you very much for that. So, Neil, let's go to you next. So, what's your thoughts on the topic?
So my personal thought is that, yes, we do have a productivity issue. However, I'm going to throw in a sort of a curveball and be a contrarian because there's a professor, Carl Haas from University of Waterloo, that recently gave a presentation, and he said, you know, he's an expert on construction productivity, and he said that if we took out, you know, the valuation of the output, which is, let's say, homes, if we looked at the valuation of homes and we took out rising material costs, and we just left the labor component, then in fact, productivity from a labor perspective has in fact increased. Putting that aside, I agree with, you know, Professor Strange's assessment. I've seen many of these such graphs before. And with respect to what we're doing at Horizon is we're focusing on how to apply innovation and technology, automation, and robotics to focus on the labor portion of productivity. So just as a cursory high-level example, when you look at a major building project and you break that down from a construction costing perspective, a project is, you know, can be simplified into two categories, material and labor. And from a developer's perspective, we can't really, you know, we can't really have a control or a lever over the materials portion that's supplied through multiple complex supply chains. But we feel that we can contribute from the labor perspective because labor is often up to 50% of the cost of construction. And we haven't really fully utilized how to use our labor force more productively and more effectively. So I'll start and leave it there for now.
Thank you for that. I think labor is an important issue, which we're going to come back to. But before that, Julie, I'll come to you. What is your general thought on the topic?
I think it's really important to look at the data and then look at the practical aspects of the data. And if you don't mind, we can actually get this little video going. This is the construction of 750 units between two highways at Lakeshore and Windermere. Obviously, we didn't build it that fast. But you've got 750 units within 24 months. I challenge you that that's not incredibly productive and whether there's an environment that can replace that productivity. Now, what I noticed about the first slides is the 1970s seemed to be a changing point. You have to understand, too, that in Toronto, multi-unit residential did not become a major force until the 70s. So I'm starting to wonder if that data has to be re-examined because you didn't have multi-unit residential construction of scale until the flying form system was created, which was incredibly efficient and was the envy of North America. The only reason it wasn't replicated in places like Chicago and New York is because they had the mandate to use steel. But even to this day, you can produce a 30,000 square foot floor in a week. Now, where we are going to have problems, we're going to have problems in something called sequencing, because the magic of the trades that we had was that they worked collaboratively and they actually dovetailed into each other. It's not uncommon now to have even very senior management companies not know what goes before next, like what the plumbing goes before the mechanical, before the structure, before the drywall. It's actually quite shocking to me that we don't have applied computer technology like AI, which is starting now to actually improve on sequencing. Lots of gaps now that are starting to evolve because institutional memory is disappearing between the trades. But to say that we're not productive from a realization standpoint, I'm not a person that believes that to be true. And in fact, it's like asking ChatGPT a question, what's faster, Toronto, LA, or New York? And then they go, well, definitely New York and LA. And then you ask, well, how much below grade construction did you account for? Well, that's a good point. Or how big were the slabs? Oh, that's a good point. So we happen to have evolved as a multi-unit residential environment, which is predominantly more expensive, but I believe incredibly efficient and incredibly cost effective for the number of units and the taxing of the economies of scale. I think that's actually incredibly efficient. I don't know how those numbers get calculated. Also, as a developer and a builder, you go around cities and the first thing you do is you don't go to the tourist spots, you look at other people's sites and what they're doing and how they're doing it. And I can tell you from practical experience, Toronto multi-unit res is pretty impressive in terms of its productivity. Do I think robotics have an amazing part of this that to improve, for example, as manpower declines, as we have less of the institutional memory? I think robotics, have you ever watched the steel being tied with robots? It's absolutely amazing. I would also tell you that lastly, safety standards have improved substantially since the 60s. Does that mean that things are a little slower than they were in the 60s and 70s? Possibly, for very good reasons. Notwithstanding that, I think robotics will be the biggest change in multi-unit residential.
Thank you very much for that, Julie, for showing us kind of the different perspective of what those data were showing. Brad, what is your thoughts on the topic?
Well, first of all, good evening, everybody. Thanks for making your way out through the snow. A lot of similarities in the comments, but I'm just going to add 2 points. I think it would be interesting to look at that graph that the professor showed and layer on 2 things over that time period. The increase in the number of regulations on the home building sector, the number of code changes, the number of additional standards. Julie just talked about safety requirements. We've been static in a very increasingly regulated industry. And so if you take productivity like for like, I'm going to suggest we're actually a lot faster than we were back in the 40s and 50s. The other thing that I think is really important, and we'll probably talk more about over the course of the evening, is the approval timelines to get to the starting line. One of the biggest challenges our industry has is it is unpredictable when things are going to start and stop. And so that investment into the construction technology side is challenged when we're all over the map. One of the things that I like to talk about is when we think about accelerating construction timelines, let's really understand which part of the journey from raw land to delivery of houses we're actually impacting. Because as Julie just said, and her video was excellent in showing it, the construction cycle time is actually really quick when you think about the whole end-to-end journey. If we can build a high-rise building in 24 months, how come it takes 7 years to get the approvals to do it? I'll leave you with that question.
Thank you for that. So it's interesting how you bring up the development process as a whole. My next question is focused on that and overall the structure of the industry itself. So do you think that the structure of the industry itself contributes to this productivity challenge? And what do you think is the role of the public sector in terms of enabling or limiting the improvement in this area? So for this question, let's start with you, Julie.
Yeah, I have a really good solution for that problem. What we look at is we look at municipalities and regulatory authorities as though they're evolving with the private sector. But you need to understand the private sector by very nature is to make money and find efficiencies. And that's not what the public sector is doing. So the public sector will be invariably behind what the private sector is doing all the time. So for example, we did a building at McAlpine and Bay Street where we actually had hit the roof before we had a full building permit because the structure was so unique that the buildings department didn't have the software to calculate it. So there's a problem when we've got these 2 silos with one advancing very quickly and one inevitably not being able to keep up. So the way to do this is to outsource to professional associations permitting. To me, that seems like quite astonishing that it hasn't been done yet. In fact, you're not getting more care simply because it's governed by elected officials. We have an example where we found something that was between 2 silos of government in terms of regulatory, the TFSA and the buildings department. And one was breaching a code issue, and neither one would have ever known if it weren't for the private sector flagging it. And it was a very serious issue. And it was something that was being repeated through the industry. So I don't believe that the public sector will be the solution. I believe the private sector in an umbrella of the public sector should be able to move forward with the professionals that we have, the OAA, the institutions, the engineers, to actually permit buildings by third parties that are accredited.
Thank you for that. Neil, what's your thoughts on this question?
Yeah, I think that we have to approach the problem from a systems perspective and understand the strengths and weaknesses of the existing systems. Professor Strange started with comparing us to manufacturing. So let's start with that. In manufacturing, they're able to achieve, increase in productivity because they have volume and repetition. So when you have volume and you have repetition, you can drive down costs. In construction, when you step to 10,000 foot level, we actually don't have any of those things, neither of those things, and it's very difficult to achieve those things from a systems perspective. Why? So every building project is approached as a craft or a custom one-off project. Construction companies are on average, I think, only 1% of Canadian construction companies have over 100 employees. So that speaks to their lack of inability to make large-scale investments in technology, inability to organize, inability to create systems and processes. Then we also have what Julie touched on, which is the regulatory aspect. When you buy your car, there's probably only a small handful of regulators that create the standards that enable that car to be driven on the road. When you buy an appliance, it's, I think, CSA and ESA. It's a federally regulated process. But in the construction and real estate industry, there are, I think, probably a couple of thousand, municipalities or groups across the country, and each of them have their own mini kingdom and process as to how they want a building built, and they each have their own quirks. So those things in combination create a condition where the actors in the system are not able to affect change, even if they wanted to and were motivated to. There's only a small handful of actors that can do that, which are people who have the scale, have the volume, and also have the money to do so. So your second question is, how does the government participate? So I was recently, last year, in Shenzhen, China, which is economic zone number 1. It was created after Deng Xiaoping took over the governing of China and reopened it to investment and foreign exchange in other countries. In a period of 30, 40 years, it was breathtaking that they were able to convert a fishing village into a city of 40 million people. And what struck me was that the roads in Shenzhen, 80% of them are electric vehicles. And some of you might have noticed that BYD, the electric car company that's Chinese, recently took over Tesla as the top producing and top selling electric vehicle maker in the world. So how did BYD do that? My understanding is that it was a concerted effort between the government of China and the tech companies who treated the roads in Shenzhen as a test bed to send out vehicles and prototypes, collect data, use that data as feedback to improve the technology. And so what you have, and you see the results of it today, and this is relevant in news given what our Prime Minister recently announced, you'll find that that process created advanced cars that are delivered cheaper than what our existing systems in the Western world has been able to produce. So I think that's the solution, that approach, to open the industry up to experimentation, to have massive collaboration, and to approach this from a systems perspective instead of individual actors in the system trying to do their own thing.
Thank you for that. Before I come to you, Brad, Julie, I noticed you were shaking your head. Do you want to?
So I actually have had been to, and this is terrible because I'm going to tell you how old I am, to Shenzhen when it was 600,000 people, and then saw it as of late, and it's an extraordinary story. There is no question. I'd like to question, though, a few things that are of issue. Definitely different criteria, inputs, labor, costs, jurisdiction, governance, very, very different. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't adopt if there are areas in the world that have advanced in certain areas. So for example, I always give the example, the hybrid engine was from Japan mostly. America was way behind. America knew that they couldn't catch up. They bought the hybrid engine and then put it in American cars, and then automatically are on par. We have a lot to catch up on, and we can most definitely use many of these innovations. I'm not sure I agree with the monopolization or the aggregation in our industry because it's very site specific. We already have a problem in Canada from an economic standpoint on the efficiencies argument of having monopolies that are not able to deliver cost effectively telecommunications, food, et cetera. Right now, we have an incredibly competitive construction industry. Maybe you'll see even more so when there's a slowdown, how competitive it gets. But I'm not sure that's exactly what's causing the problems. I wouldn't want to see it aggregate. And also, I think it's very, very difficult to do so when it's site specific. Now, there is another anecdote. I was in Korea in 2001, actually, with Peter Gilgan. And we went by a development of about 12 apartments that looked exactly the same. My first instinct was, is that social housing? They go, no. We just repeat. So there is something to when you have the opportunity at scale, but you're giving up, there's no question you're giving up aesthetic. You're not going to have variance. You're not going to have angular planes. You're not going to have all the criteria that urban development has required of us. And you're not going to have things like main streets because of the scale is much smaller and it's not as efficient. So although I agree that we have so much to learn and we'd like to adopt innovations that we've seen in those economies that grew over 30 years in a magnificent fashion, we can take that innovation and put it here and embed it in the culture. I'm not so sure I believe in the aggregating of the industry.
Thank you. Brad, what's your thoughts on this topic?
So earlier, Professor Strange said if you disagree, double click. So I'll maybe give you something to disagree with, but I'm going to come at this from a slightly different angle. And that is, who do we feel has the most to say about new home development in Canada? And I'll give you my take. It's those who already have a home. So if you pause and you think about that for a second, who do we give the loudest voice to about new housing? And why I bring this up in this context is because I think government really needs to think about who they're listening to when it comes to housing policy. Because I guarantee you, housing policy does not get fixed in 4-year cycles. And why do I say 4-year cycles? Because 4 years is the election cycle. And if the people who are already living in houses have the strongest voice because they re-elect the politicians who make the policy decisions for long-term solutions to the housing sector, we are going to be in this issue over and over again. I think we need to make generational decisions about what it's going to take to industrialize the home building sector, to create the conditions to scale manufacturing, as we've talked about, and then stick to those. I think we can accomplish this with big, sweeping, bold policy changes that we make once and then we stick to for a generation.
Professor Strange, I remember you talking about specifically this topic in one of your lectures. Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I can't resist responding to Brad. He's exactly right. I mean, you think about the municipal elections. Who votes in municipal elections? Older people do. Who owns houses? Older people own houses. What's the most important asset that they own? Their houses. And so this affordability problem that we talk about, there's just a huge amount of schizophrenia about what we really want. People want their kids to be able to buy cheaper houses, but they don't want mom and dad's nest eggs to become valueless. And the political economy issues are hard. One advantage we can take of this situation we find ourselves in is to ask people to make sacrifices for the larger civilization. And I think Brad is right about the politics. There's one more economic and data point I'd like to make that's consistent with what all of the other three panelists have said. It is a stylized fact that the more land use regulation you have in a jurisdiction, the lower is the estimated productivity of housing in that jurisdiction, and the smaller is the average firm size. And so you have regulation, it makes it harder to be a big firm. Being harder to be a big firm, as Young said, makes it harder to innovate. And so that is another one of the puzzles we have to think about. Just to be completely clear, I don't think we're in this problem because businesses don't care about productivity. They are not off playing golf. They want to be as productive as they can be because that's where their business advantages live. We need to look at how the larger society interacts with the construction process. And I am not saying pave the greenbelt, but I am asking, are the many regulations that we impose on the construction project able to pass a cost-benefit test, or might we choose to simplify things in the interest of making it possible to build housing for less money? Thank you.
And Professor Strange, just to come back to that, I would tell you at Mattamy Homes, the governor on our delivery of annual closings is not construction productivity, it's land approvals. And so we have a massive team of people on the development side in our organization working every day to get us to the starting line of construction. Capacity to complete those houses today is not the issue.
And every one of those people is in the denominator of a labor productivity expression. There's people, you got to pay for them. And thus, I'm going to disagree on productivity because I think that's part of productivity, that these workers could be doing other things for you, but instead they're trying to persuade the government, pretty please, to let you build the project that they say they want you to build.
Thank you, Will and Brad. So let's dig deeper into productivity by looking at the real-world examples from developers and builders' perspectives. When it comes to the improving productivity, what are the internal bottlenecks you face most on your projects, and how's your company responding? For example, through innovations like modular construction, robotics, or new technologies. I will start with you because I know Horizon Legacy has been active in construction technology and robotics.
Yes, and I'm going to ask the AV team to help me cue some pictures that we're going to go through really quickly. Okay, so this first picture, so as I said from the beginning, we asked ourselves how we can focus and make a change and, you know, what we can control. And we think that's on the decision-making of the way that the building comes together and the methodologies. So what we ended up doing is starting down the path of using robots to build parts of the building. So what you're seeing here in this picture is a robotic system that we named it Val. It's a girl. She is adapted from the automotive manufacturing robotic arms, and then we customized it so that it can work on a job site. And in this process, she's been designed to extrude concrete using a 3D printing process. Why did we do that? Because I think it was Julie that mentioned formwork was a major advancement. And even today, formwork represents one of the most labor-intensive tasks of the process in construction. So in this process, we are eliminating the formwork portion of the process. And we think that the process of how this is delivered, it can be done by 8 people and 2 robots, what typically would require, you know, up to 40 or 50 people. Next slide. So this is our first build that is underway, or it's about to reach completion. This is the first and largest neighborhood in Canada built using an on-site robotic strategy. The top picture is a rendering, and the bottom pictures, the middle picture is a finished building that was just taken last week, and occupancy is next month. So this project was built in accordance with the Ontario Building Code requirements. It went through all the regulatory ringers. It took about, 12 months, a little bit more, like maybe 14 months to construct. And then we worked in partnership with the municipality to work through all the technical issues. I mean, you can imagine there's a litany of issues that have to be addressed in these kinds of developments. Next slide, please. So not to sort of rest or anything like that. We started very quickly on, this is the second build, which is the first multi-story building project in Canada, and probably one of the first in the world. So it's leading edge technology and process for the world. So it's a 3-story building where we significantly expanded the scope of the technology. So we're deploying multiple robots on the job site. And the robot's probably building about 50 to 60% of the mass of the building. And now we've expanded the scope to about 30% of the cost of the building. So we were able to do this in a very rapid cycle development time. This building is being built in accordance with the National Building Code. It's under construction right now. And we expect that the robotic portion of the work will be complete by the end of this year. And this project is now in discussions for phase 2 to expand the scope. And this is actually, I'm quite proud to say that this is leading edge, Canadian built technology, leading edge for Canada and the world. And again, the value is how we see this particular technology being deployed is on the labor savings component. And it's a markedly different approach than what's being done, what's been tried so far, because you can see that this form of building, it's a half moon, it's a custom bespoke form, which lends itself to everybody understands 3D printing from a small scale perspective. It enables mass customization, which I think suits more towards what we build in construction.
Thanks for sharing, Nong. I think it's really a moving forward for this whole industry. So next, Brad, how's the Mattamy Home approaching this?
So we're coming at it, I would say, differently depending on the built form. Julie talked earlier about how effective the GTA high-rise sector is, and I would agree with her that it is leading edge. And it is certainly more challenging to think about some of these advancements in technology on a whole building process when it comes to a 50-story building. I think in that case, it's a lot of manufacture and assemble. What are the parts and pieces of the build that we can manufacture off-site and then bring and add to the system in high-rise? On the low-rise side, I think there's a lot of opportunity to bring modern methods of construction to the table. And certainly through our sister company, Stellumar Advanced Manufacturing, we like to call it SAMI for short, we are making significant investments in both panelized construction and volumetric construction. These are wood-based technologies. We are under construction on a new 500,000 square foot factory just beside the airport. And we hope to be delivering the first panels out of that factory later this year. So there is a lot of opportunity, but I think it's really important when we say construction, we recognize that construction is a big continuum and there will be different solutions for different types of housing.
Thanks, Brad. It's very exciting to see all the innovation happening. So Julie, what does this look like in practice in Mirabella?
What we've been able to do is even on the site that you saw on a fast forward basis, we had cameras in every single suite photographing and filming where we saw the pinch points of where sequencing was failing. And so what we'd like to do is with AI implement software and tools that we then provide to other people in the industry that tells what sequencing needs to happen in what order. So that's one of the areas. But we also are starting to see components assembled together, exterior wall systems with windows. That saves a little bit of time. But again, you're sacrificing aesthetic if you don't have a repeat. So if you did 750 units of that, that's perfectly fine. That's a large scale project, $500 million. And so you won't be able to necessarily apply that to another shape building. So we think it's going to be in software. We think it's going to be in robotics.
Thanks, Julie. It's really encouraging to hear all the project steps your organization are taking to improve the productivity. So building on that, I'd like to broaden the discussion a little bit. So what are some practical and realistic steps that the industry or government could take to improve the productivity on the ground? Julie, I will start with you.
Well, if the productivity includes for approval times, as Brad said, to have 7 years and only 2 years of it is construction is really unconscionable. So that's a serious problem. The way to do it, as I said, is to have outsourcing of approvals, because we're not going to have, in multi-unit residential and urban development, you're not going to have sites that are the same. You just won't. You'll have different constraints. So you need professionals to be able to approve these projects. So that's the first thing I would say in terms of improvements. I also hope that everybody distinguishes very clearly between multi-unit residential and low-rise. And we've made incredible strides in multi-unit residential, which has saved acres and acres and acres of environmental lands, because we went from being 75% low-rise to 75% multi-unit residential. So if you look at what we've done in terms of efficient use of infrastructure, and I'm not sure if that's part of productivity, but it should be. Efficient use of infrastructure is a tax-based improvement that overall brings about affordability. So multi-unit residential should be distinguished from low-rise, and I do believe that we'll be able to add, if we add components, then municipalities can allow us to outsource approvals.
Thanks, Julie. That's really beautiful suggestions. Brad, how about you?
Again, I'll come at it from a little bit of a different angle, and that is getting back to something that Professor Strange talked about. When supply is constrained, productivity suffers. If we go back to, I believe it's 1971, Canada at that time hit a high water mark of 273,000 housing completions that year. In 2021, we hit that number again, and that was the high water mark. So in 40, 50 years, whatever that is, 50 years, we basically had the same high water mark. The government has come out and said we need to build 500,000 houses per year. If we unlock supply, we do a couple things. We create the conditions for innovation, and we also create much more affordability. The number one reason that houses are so expensive in the GTA, there aren't enough of them. It's as simple as that. We need more houses to drive down affordability and to increase innovation.
Thanks, Brad. Thanks. That's very insightful. And New, what's your perspective on this topic?
So I think that innovation is really about de-risking, and to encourage innovation is really to encourage risk-taking and to provide the support system to do that. So I would, it's not up to solely the private sector. I think obviously government and the whole, they have to play a role. And what I propose is to not just for them to throw money at it out of pocket. I would say, create financial incentives for private investors to take risk. So there's a lot of private capital here in Canada that's not active, that is willing to take risks, to invest in companies that are willing to try out innovations, and to incentivize them to tax credits, investment credits, whatever it is, and let people try and fail in different cycles, and let early adopters test these technologies, let people who are working on AI or building manufacturing facilities benefit, and let them attract capital. And it doesn't have to be on the government's dime, let it be on private capital's dime. But then also create structures, rules to enable and activate innovation. And despite what's happening in the world right now, in the economy, we don't have to cower down. We could turn this opportunity into something that, unlocks and unwakes, like opens up the possibilities. I mean, right now, the real estate industry is in a major contraction. The existing ways of doing things is not working. We need to drive down costs. We need to increase productivity. And there's no other time to do this. If we did this 5 or 10 years ago, people would have said, we're making too much money, why not change it? But now we don't have a choice. So we must do something different if we're going to move forward.
Thanks, Neil. I think the financial incentives are really matters to improve the productivity. So, well, how does this look from your side?
Excuse me, can you repeat the question?
So, what's practical and realistic steps for the industry or government could take to improve productivity? Please.
I'm going to agree with especially Brad, but both of the other panelists also, that building more houses allows bigger business. Bigger business allows scale economies and will help in various ways to improve productivity. But again, I'm going to echo what everyone on the panel has said already, is we have lots of regulations that make it hard to do new things and make it simply expensive to do business. Some of these things we need. Some of these things we would not get rid of, but we really need a thorough review to make sure that the ones that we have are the ones that have high value. And I'll make one more point in conclusion. Productivity matters not just within the construction and housing sectors, but also within the larger economy. Canada used to be just about comparable with the US in 1970 in productivity. It gradually began to lose this status, and it lost a lot of it post-pandemic. This is related directly to the inability to produce housing. The most productive parts of Canada are the big cities, and this is true of all economies. Cities exist precisely because they make productivity possible. By making it expensive to live in Canada's most productive places, it has made harder for Canadians and Canada as a whole to be productive itself. And what's the good of general productivity? Whatever you want. If you want public services, you need productivity to do it. If you want to have a nice car, you need productivity to do it. So I agree that we need, the first thing I would attempt to do would be to address regulations that impede innovation and impede the supply of housing. Thank you, Joyce.
Brad, I had a specific question for you. I understand that Mattamy Homes also operates a lot in United States. What are some of the differences that you see between United States and Canada, specifically focusing on this issue of productivity?
So there's lots of things that we could talk about there, but I'll start with the conditions for investment are much more predictable in the United States than they are in Canada. So I want to come back first to that timeline to get to the starting line. In the US, that same 7 years that I talked about, and these are just very broad brush timeframes, but same 7 years to bring a piece of raw land to construction ready, we can do that in about 18 to 24 months in the United States. So right out of the gate, imagine the amount of capital left to invest in construction and at the same time make the product much more affordable. I think we really need to remember that, you know, for-profit business is chasing a return. Capital is agnostic. It's going to go wherever it can get the best return. And the reason we get good returns in the United States is because everything happens quicker. And so understanding that speed is supply, speed is a catalyst for more houses, we really need to focus on what are the differences between how we get housing approved in the United States versus how we get it approved in Canada. And just spoiler alert, we are not running roughshod over environmental requirements. They are just as stringent. But instead of having a kind of delay and obfuscate and find ways to slow things down, they have a get it done mentality. And I apologize if I'm being very stereotypical here, but trend lines are consistent. And we find a much more business first, get the housing built mindset in the jurisdictions we work in the United States versus many of the jurisdictions we work in here in Canada.
Thank you for that. Neil, I wanted to go back to the discussion that we had earlier and some of the technologies that you implemented, specifically the robots that you're using within your company. So as leaders in the industry, do you think pushing for innovation in your organization, is that difficult? Because you mentioned that scale makes it hard for people to invest. But my question is, as a big organization, does that scale make it hard for you to push the innovation through your company?
Absolutely, and I don't pretend that, change is easy to enact. The way that we did it was to start from scratch with a brand new team and to work outside the existing structure. So I would recommend that, anybody within large organization, you have to do that because the existing systems, people, processes will create resistance. So ideally, starting an offshoot branch, starting clean and fresh and giving a blank slate. That's how we approached it. But even, there's so many opportunities in the existing ecosystem to implement innovation. For example, there's all sorts of non-invasive technologies that can be implemented today. There are robots that do layouts of sites, so you can mark up spots, and that takes away a process and it digitizes a process. I was with Hydro-Quebec recently, last year, at an international conference on robotics in construction, and Hydro-Quebec is deploying drones to survey and capture conditions of their site. And they have a team of 20 people doing that, and they're saving tons of money by using this non-invasive process. I mentioned China and Germany, Europe, Singapore has major construction robotics centers right now. And when we started this 5 years ago, we were one of 20 companies in the world that was playing with this technology. Since then, there's probably hundreds of companies in this particular technology. And since then, there's been hundreds more companies working on other aspects of robotics in the construction process. For example, we have, I think, Canvas, which is a painting robot that's been tried and being tried. There's drywall robots that are taking away the labor saving, or like the labor intensive part of the drywall process. There's concrete finishing robots. Samsung is working on a partnership with, I can't remember the company, but they bought out a company doing rebar tying process, because rebar is a very silly process that you have to manually tie the rebar, and why can't we industrialize this process? And then I mentioned to you, SoftBank recently purchased a major industrial robot company called ABB. It was a multi-billion-dollar deal. And their intention is to, now they're talking about physical AI. So AI, as we understand it, exists in the virtual environment, in the digital environment. SoftBank's intent is to convert AI into the physical environment so that we have AI affecting physical things. So those are all very exciting developments that's just been emerging in the last 5 years. And it's definitely something to pay attention to, or if you're curious about it. And yeah, I could probably talk about this for hours. It's a very interesting topic for me.
Thank you for that. I want to leave ample amount of time for the questions from the audience. But before that, I want to ask you a final question on my end. So we talked about the past in the industry. We talked about what's happening in the industry. So I want to talk about the future. So looking ahead, what is your vision for the future of this industry? Julie, let's start with you.
The greatest difficulty that I would say, and it's actually quite tragic, is that the industry has completely seized up and all the institutional memory will now dissipate. And so what I would like to see urgently is that the government actually fills in that gap, because when you lose that momentum, you lose that productivity, you're losing a generation of talent and, as I said, institutional memory. And so what I'd like to see in the future almost immediately is the government should be backstopping in every way possible, even if it's replicating those units all in affordable housing. It happened in the 90s before, when the market seized up. The government said, we're going to do 100,000 affordable units. And they did it, and we're better for it. So what I'd like to see on an urgent basis is that the government backstops the capacity that we had and that we get going again. Otherwise, it will be a lot more difficult 3 to 5 years from now to recover it all.
Thank you. Brad.
I think we've all heard the saying, never waste a good crisis. We have an opportunity to take advantage of the pullback in the housing sector right now and lean hard into reinventing ourselves and making some structural changes to the very issues that got us in the problem in the first place. Absolutely, we can point to government. There's lots of things government can do. We need to reduce the tax burden on new housing dramatically. Development charges, HST. The only thing we tax more in this country than housing is alcohol and cigarettes. Those are two things we don't want Canadians to consume. We need to get the tax burden off of housing so that we can, again, get back to building and building lots. At the same time, going into this downturn, we were absolutely fearful that skilled workers were aging out quickly. Now's our chance to reframe the skilled trades, to get the youth of today excited about working in the construction space. They're fantastic jobs, they're well-paying jobs, and we need more people so that when the industry runs again, and it will, we have the workers to do it in combination with the technology advancements that we can make. So I really want to be positive, and I do see positive things. BCH has been designed to help scale up modern methods of construction, exactly like Julie said. It's one piece of the puzzle, though. It's not a silver bullet. We need the private sector functioning on all cylinders. We need the public sector functioning on all cylinders. And we really need to take a build, build, build attitude, not a wait for revenues to go back up and all will be well again.
Thank you. Neil, what is your vision?
So I kind of want to echo a little bit of what Brad was saying and really talk about the statistics, leave the audience with the statistic that we're experiencing a silver tsunami, that 1 in 5 construction workers will be retiring in the next 10 years. And to highlight, what he talked about, which is that over the last number of decades, we had very difficult time recruiting young people into construction. So my thesis is that, and what we've also seen from our own experience, is that young people gravitate very naturally towards technology. They grew up with it. And so we believe that if we give them a reason to participate in a different way in construction and relearn what it actually takes to build a project, to build a building, that we can attract a new generation into the sector and recreate and reinvent the sector. So it's really, for me, also about young people. And this is what drives me, or drives us in a significant way, is how can we invite a new generation of people into the sector to solve the existing challenges that we have.
Thank you. Professor.
Honestly, I'm somewhat speechless, which my students will know is somewhat rare. These suggestions that we have are perfect. We need to address labor markets in regard to construction. We need the public sector to be strategic in regard to construction. And I'll beat the dead horse yet again, that we need to address the regulatory issue and the many costs that it imposes. Thank you, Parson.
Thank you very much. Now I'll hand it off to my colleagues, Sam and Jean-Luc. Please, if you didn't have a chance to submit your question, now it's your time. Submit your question for this last portion.
Parson, Joyce, I think we can conclude you are exceptional. Well done.
Yeah, thank you very much. I don't know about you guys, but I've been really, really enjoying this. So thank you very much. And I wanted to take one moment to ask everyone, if you're interested, to please go to slido.com and take a look at the questions, because you have the power to upvote questions that are interesting to you. And I think we may not get through every single one. So if you want to have a say in which questions we do go through, then please go onto the website and upvote the ones that are most interesting to you. With that, I'm Sam, and I'll pass it on to Jean-Luc to get us kicked off on the question segment.
Thanks, Sam, and thanks, Parson and Joyce, for an incredible start to this panel. As Sam said, we're just going to be going in order of the most popular questions, because at the end of the day, this panel is based upon what our audience is most interested in hearing. So, starting off right at the top, and this is for all speakers, Canada has a strong and advanced manufacturing base in the automotive industry, aerospace, and robotics. What steps are needed to repurpose or adapt these capabilities towards higher volume modular housing production? And what is the bottleneck today? So let's start off at the end with Young.
So your question is, where are we at today, and what do we need to do to get there? Is that the question?
Yeah, I would say that the question revolves around what sectors do you see us being able to pull technologies from?
Yeah.
And where can we utilize that today?
Yeah, so I mean, we could take our own example. We didn't have to reinvent the wheel from scratch to de-risk and to take measured risk, and started with a robot that came from the automotive manufacturing sector and was able to reprogram it to apply it and make it work on the job site. These robots are used not just in automotive manufacturing, but in other sectors, in making planes and chips and other other sectors. And so it's not really to me, I don't view it as sort of, it's not just about the tool, it's about the process of how that's delivered. We need to think of, I think it starts with also a mindset change, that we need to think of the housing as a product that's repeatable, that we need to move away from a custom one-off product. But when you look at, when you buy a car, you don't really intervene in the engineering decisions of that car, for instance. So you don't really say, like, you go and you buy and you pick the trims. You want to pick, I want leather seating, I want power steering, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a certain element of customization that you already get when you buy a car. And so that's how we should think about it in housing. And I think there's certain extent this is already true, but we need to expand that. So that how can we engineer a building that's repeatable and scalable, and it's a product that's engineered once and then repeated again and again, but still achieving the customization that the end user wants. And I think that's how we begin the steps towards more manufacturing-based or industrialized-based construction.
Amazing, thank you. Julie?
I got to say, I think our industry hasn't been doing a very good job advocating for itself, because if you just went up to Vaughan and saw how many factories serve our industry in terms of kitchens, flooring, mechanical systems, we're not really telling you that we actually are already building in kits. So things show up in tractor trailers, they get lifted up on the crane, and repeat, repeat, repeat. And I know I've seen quite a few architects in the audience. The aesthetic of these buildings is differentiating from a sales standpoint. No one is going to go from a pre-sale standpoint and say, I really like building A because it looks just like building B. So you're going to have to see what we're going to do about producing housing on a spec basis if we're going to actually make things exactly the same over and over again. I appreciate that the customization will probably would be the interiors, and I can assure you that if you've ever gone to a sales center now, the amount of variations that are available to clients are extensive. And they're not because it's one product, it's because every single developer is sourcing from that one manufactured manufacturing plant in Vaughan, for example, or in somewhere else. I think robotics will be the biggest improvement, and I do believe the automotive industry and other industries that use robotics will help us everywhere that we have manpower. And the last thing I wanted to mention is that what has to change also is, unlike everybody on this panel who are all hands-on and know what their job sites look like, I think the industry changed when the investment bankers took over the industry. There are a lot of people that have never visited their job sites, and to them it's just a pro forma. We're not going to have applied innovation if we have absentee proponents. So it has to return back to people that actually build the product so that we can take the innovation and apply it effectively.
Thank you. Brett?
I think we've talked around this, a lot about this, but I believe that in addition to a national housing strategy, we need a national industrialization strategy for housing. We need a set of codes. We need a set of approvals that I'll give you a couple of quick examples. If we build a volumetric unit in the city of Mississauga and we want to drive it to Ottawa, guess what? The transportation regulations are different as we move through different municipalities. That doesn't work. We need one set of regulation that allows the free flow of goods to move consistently. Similarly, If you think about this crazy example, and if you have a chance, I wish I knew the exact address, but West Group out of Vancouver has put together some great videos that show how the construction of housing differs from manufacturing. And one of the examples that I love is they say, imagine if to deliver a car in Mississauga said, well, the gas tank has to be on the right side. But Toronto said the gas tank has to be on the left side. And then guess what? Vaughan says the gas tank has to be under the trunk. That's what we do in housing. It's that level of minutia and local planning variances that make us as builders go bonkers when it comes to repeatability. And I think it was said earlier, manufacturing requires replication. Replication yields productivity, and productivity is lower cost.
Appreciate it. Sam?
Thank you. So the next question, and I think Julie, maybe we'll start with you on this one. Give you the heads up so you know to stay focused on it. But by the end of 2025, there are more than 800,000 residential units in Toronto approved but not built yet. The government can make the approval process faster, but it can't make the market good. What do private and public sectors need to do now?
Well, that is a huge question, because I would say that the massing of all of that density that you just described is very, very different. And you heard it in a lecture that we had a couple of weeks ago here. You've got some buildings that are approved at 80 stories that are uneconomical probably for the next 15 years. You've got some projects that are location specific that would be viable. By the very nature of how we build the urban form, sites happen to be different. And so what will need to be available to underpin any kind of viability, as far as I'm concerned, is the financial tools have been completely annihilated, and they need to come back, and they had to come back differently. We won't be able to build on pre-sale because pre-sales don't exist. We'll need a new financing model to get that density off the ground. But I can tell you that the density that will come off the ground first will be the scale that is appropriate for the consumption that is required. So for example, public transit-oriented sites will go first. Super tall buildings will go last.
Thank you. Do any of the other speakers want to jump in, or we can move on to the next question?
I'll just offer one point. You mentioned 800,000 units, and it's a very common statement, so please don't take this the wrong way. But that's one of the problems right there. We describe housing as if it's all the same thing, a unit. Whether it's a 300 square foot studio or a 4,000 square foot single family home, it's a unit. The reality is the market needs different things. Our industry is full after the last decade of the commoditization of real estate, of investor-driven product that doesn't meet the needs of many of the consumers. And so we need to reevaluate, what does the market actually want? What does it actually need? And how do we deliver it at cost? It's illogical to me, for example, that in this environment where we need more family-driven housing, that the development charges just go up by square footage. Like somehow that's the right way to think about development. To, if it's bigger, charge more for it. Well, the reality is you should be charging less for what you need more of and more for what you have too much of. Simple economics, but we don't seem to bring that kind of logic to the table right now.
Brad, this one's coming back to you. Are you optimistic that Build Canada Homes will achieve its goal successfully? And what headwinds are you anticipating with regards to it?
Well, first of all, I'm a developer, so I'm optimistic. I don't think you could be in this industry if you weren't an optimist. I am optimistic. I'll be very honest with the room. I was with Anna Bailau this morning. I continue to be very positive and encouraging. I think she took on one heck of a monster of a job. There is a lot to fix in Canada when it comes to delivering housing, but more particularly when it comes to delivering affordable housing. We have underbuilt as a country on the affordable side for decades. We got a lot of work to do to catch up. I hear the right things. I hear the right sound bites. I believe our leaders presently are saying the right things. I'm still a little bit in a wait and see mode as it turns into action. They have to move quicker, and I believe they have to be bolder in making swings. One of the things that Anna said this morning, and if she was here, I hope she wouldn't mind me repeating it, but it currently takes 9 years to get federal lands approved and released for housing development. 9 years. The government owns the land. The government knows that we have a housing crisis. How about we do it in 9 months? Like, these are the types of headwinds that are being faced. We've got to create a new rule book for a new generation if we're going to solve this issue.
It does seem like a common theme across a couple of these have to do with the timelines associated with approvals. I just wanted to give the chance if anyone else has anything to add to that.
I want to give a model that occurred, and Anna, I'll tell you what's great about the system of the people that's in place now is that if there's a bottleneck, they're responsive. They're not saying that we know this is the way it's going to work. So I've seen them be incredibly responsive and more responsive than ever, which I think is extremely helpful. But what I want to tell you about a model that existed in the 90s that produced more multi-unit residential affordable housing than probably in our history, especially in the city of Toronto. It was the maximum unit price. And what the government did is they applied logic of factory building, and I'll tell you why it was that way. But in terms of, this is the amount of money we're going to give you for a 1-bedroom. This is the amount of money we're going to give you for a 2-bedroom. And this is the amount of money we're going to give you for a 3-bedroom. The whole industry was able to work together to create the housing within that pricing framework. So the private sector delivered, the government set the price and did the financing. So if the easiest way out of this quagmire is to start with affordable housing, that's exactly what we should do. And it's a resource. I think someone mentioned Singapore. I believe Singapore has more per capita social housing units than any country. And I believe Hong Kong was second, which you think of them as incredible capitalistic centers. Well, if you don't have affordable housing, you can't underpin the rest of the society. You can't have people working at hospitals. You can't have the productivity that we need in anything else if people are traveling so far from their home. So what they did is, again, just like the car parts manufacturers, they set a price. This is what the price is for that product. And the whole industry retooled to deliver it. And it was incredibly successful. And those loans have since been paid. So that's what I hope will come about at some point. And I would say again that the government has been incredibly responsive this time on hearing feedback in regards to their initiatives.
If I can just quickly add to that, I see one of my good friends from Civic Action in the audience here, and we like to think about it this way. Housing is infrastructure. What Julie just said, why it works in Singapore, why it works in Hong Kong, is because they recognized early and often that the housing was a catalyst to a healthy economy. If workers can afford housing, they don't have to worry about other things. They contribute to GDP growth, and a lot of good things happen. So one of the things I think we got to shift away from, we hear a lot of, we need infrastructure to support housing. Change that sentence to, we need housing, which is infrastructure.
Yeah, I'd like to add one more point to this discussion. And for me, it's about the money. So when we look at Build Canada Homes, I love the initiative. I hope that they succeed, that we need them to succeed. The challenge is that I think Build Canada Homes has been allocated something like $7 or $13 billion, which is a big number. It seems like a big number to us, but it's actually a drop in the bucket in terms of actual capital. And it's not going to supply, depending on how they divvy it up, it's not going to supply the millions of units that we actually need to make things affordable. The only solution I see to this is to access and leverage private capital. The government, we know the coffers are running out. We can't just solely look on the government to supply the money. So, the term of development charges came up, and this is talked about as like a drumbeat in the industry for the last number of years to force municipality to reduce development charges. I would add a nuance to that. So for the context of the audience, in each municipality, the City of Toronto or Vaughan might add $100,000 or $150,000 whatever the number is, to the per unit of new unit that's built. And that developers say is adding to the cost of housing. But the development charges reduction is a zero-sum game, because in order for somebody to win, somebody has to lose. And the loser will be the municipality, who has to take that money that, you know, they would reserve to build infrastructure to support that development, which is, you know, for example, sewers, power, water, etc. Now, I think there's been recent discourse on an alternative, which is perhaps municipalities don't take the money directly from developers. You know, maybe Canada Infrastructure Bank or a large enough institution can fund that infrastructure and privatize it so that it becomes a long-term asset, and therefore the municipalities don't have to take it directly from developers, and removing the requirement to some other organization. So that to me is a positive example of a different financial instrument to solve the problem, like a different way to, through financial means, to solve the problem. And it's necessary because BCH alone cannot solve the problem.
Thank you. Julie,
I think a few things. BCH is being so creative that in the second phase, they're actually looking at loan guarantees. So that responsiveness has been really reassuring. They're hearing what problems we have, and they're saying, what tools can we provide? So let's, you know, wait and see, but not wait too long. In terms of development charges, I need to disagree, because Toronto and Canada in particular uses development charges very differently than other areas that use tax increment financing. What we're forgetting is that if you're building, like I did at Bay and College, on 100 feet by 100 feet, which is like a lot in Vaughan, and providing 127 housing units, that's new tax base that did not exist before. On only 100 feet by 100 feet, the truck doesn't need to travel very far. The garbage services don't need to travel very far. We have our own security and our own amenities. So that is tax positive revenue on a very small footprint that should go to fund the infrastructure. So tax increment financing takes the cost of the infrastructure and takes it from your new tax base that did not exist before. I think what happened is the development charges were an easy reach, and interest rates hid them for very long because they were so low. But by the time we hit the wall, when interest rates came back to a normal level, then you start to see that the impact is upwards of 35% of every new home is taxes. And that's paid for in after-tax dollars. And that's not only paid in after-tax dollars. If you get a mortgage, it actually doubles in value over the life of your mortgage. So it is of critical importance to actually remove that. Now, people have said, well, if you remove it, the developer's going to increase their profits. Well, that's not how it works. But if you're not reassured that that will not happen, then rebate it to the purchaser.
And also remember, our biggest competitor as a home builder is not each other. It's the resale industry. And the resale industry is a perfect free market. One house, one vendor, one buyer, one at a time, every day. That's what sets the value of housing. And that brings me back to my point about more supply will hold down prices better than any other policy. And so if you're worried that, you know, somehow the industry will grab savings, we'll only be able to grab those savings if there isn't enough supply. And so I think that we have to come back to the simple economics of more supply equals more affordability.
There's one thing I'd like to add to this discussion, and this is unfortunately going to show that I am not as optimistic as Brad is, maybe because I'm a professor rather than a builder, I'm not really sure. And that is that we all need to remember that the situation we're in with really high taxes on new housing and regulations that make it expensive to provide, they're there for it because it works for some people. And one group that it works for is existing homeowners. But we are going to need to find a way to get past this barrier. We haven't accidentally acquired all these regulations. We've acquired them because they work. And so on the question about what from Canada's other industries we should draw on, I guess my answer, only a little facetiously, would be hockey. And that is, and I'm not just saying elbows up or a two-hander across the ankles or something like that. a big dimension of this problem is moral rather than physical or economic. And it's about us deciding we are in it together and being willing to let go of things that are barriers and move into a future where we can all potentially benefit.
Thank you. We struck gold on that question. Moving on to the next one here. Brad, we'll start with you on this one. So this comes back to the timelines that we've been discussing for development. And this question hones in on it a little bit, asking which piece of regulation would have the most impact on decreasing construction costs and permitting time? And it specifies the Planning Act, the Development Charges Act, or the Building Code.
Wow, that's a fun question. Can I take all of the above? I'll pick for this time, and maybe Julie can pick a different one, but I'll say the Planning Act. And what I'll say with the Planning Act is we need as of right zoning. As of right zoning within certain jurisdictions would immediately give the opportunity to value that land, have certainty, move with speed through the planning process, have the fight once. And the example I always love to use is if you drive along Bloor Street and you look at the height and scale of development as you move from subway station to subway station to subway station, there are stark differences. And while we all love our historical neighborhoods, at the end of the day, we have to scale development around public transit. I'll give you another quick bugaboo of mine. Help me understand why we have dedicated single-story transit stations. There we go. I hit a nerve with that one. I got some friends in the room. In every other major city in the world, you walk into a big high-rise building that's sitting right beside or right over top of a transit station. And yet, for some reason, in Toronto, as we planned a brand new line at Shepherd, as we're planning new construction and development up to Vaughan, we have these single-story Taj Mahal transit stations. Again, food for thought.
Does anybody else want to jump in on
I
that?
would say Brad's right. It's the planning portions of it, because I'd say the buildings department is doing as good a job as it possibly can do to get permits out as fast as possible. So I would say that it has issues in terms of should be as of right. For example, main streets, if anybody understands, people always say, why don't we have the missing middle? Well, Main Streets was a brilliant initiative of the planning department of the City of Toronto, and then they killed it in regulation. So on the principles, it was fantastic. Intensify along main streets, modest scale, meaning not 80-story buildings, 7, 6. But then it was so restrictive that it actually became prohibitive. So the building code repaired itself by being performance-based. So probably principles-based planning could work in terms of what is this accomplishing, how many affordable units. For example, people forgot already since I did Balmoral that north-south access buildings physically are more environmentally friendly than not, because your exposure north and south is less. So we were doing these things, but because they got over-regulated, the principles got set to the side.
I have one more thing to add to this, which is I've been attending, probably over 20 housing conferences in the last couple of years, and unfailingly, in every single conference and discussion about this issue, the lack of progress on approvals and zoning always comes up, which if you step back tells you, what does it tell you? It tells you that the government hasn't been effective at solving this problem, even though they know exactly what the problem is. So I'm gonna take a leap and say that, Mr. Carney and our Premier Doug Ford know exactly what it takes to fix this problem. But they haven't done it. And they haven't done it because the political will isn't there. Their gauge is that if we make these changes, each municipality will stand up and object to zoning issues. And we're gonna have to deal with hundreds or thousands of people complaining because in principle, they want more affordable housing, they want industrialized systems, they want everything. And our politicians know what the solution is. They have armies of people that write the policies and recommendations that say, this is what you need to do, but they don't have the willpower to execute it. And so what it means for us is that I think everybody has to get a little bit uncomfortable out of what they want and give up something that they want. And for the neighborhood, it's really, or for the municipality, it's really giving up control over certain decisions to standardize it. And for, for developers, I might make sort of an uncomfortable statement as well, and that is that the industry has benefited and made a lot of money over the last several decades over the old models. And we have to get uncomfortable and be willing to do something different and rethink financial structures and what we're willing to do. If we want to really be serious about building affordable housing, we have to rethink pro formas and we have to rethink what we're willing to do. It's not just up to government, it's up to every single player in that system.
So in the interest of time here, this is going to be our last question, and it's with regards to sustainability. So I'm going to pass it over to all three speakers, but the question is, how do you view sustainability in new construction? And do concerns about reduced productivity hinder its broader adoption? I guess we'll start with Brad down here.
So very proud to say that at Mattamy Homes, sustainability is a core value of our organization. And for the last 2 years, we have issued an annual sustainability report. We have full support of our founder, owner, and his family in terms of advocating for and pushing forward with the sustainability agenda. I'll suggest that sustainability is actually one of the areas where we have innovated the most in the home building sector, and it can be a catalyst to pull other types of innovation along. And so I don't perceive sustainability and affordability as mutually exclusive. I actually think one can contribute to the other. We just have to stay the course. And again, we have to standardize. Right now, each municipality has a different green standard. Each province has a different approach. Ontario, Alberta, very, very different realities. So we need to create the conditions to scale sustainability and allow it to be part of the innovation agenda.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think that the industry has made headway, but I also want to tell you that I think the city in particular, and I'm not sure if other municipalities have been helpful in providing financial incentives if you actually beat a certain level of Toronto Green Standards. So it actually allowed people to see this is how much we can save, this is how much we can engineer. So it was very successful. We particularly also care a lot. We're lead candidate gold on a recent project and beat the Toronto Green Standards. But I want to give you another example when you talked about sacrifices. The client will also need to make sacrifices. Based on the Toronto Green Standards at the highest level, you're probably going to have a lot fewer balconies on buildings because of certain things that need to be done in order to allow the balcony to pass that criteria. So please understand that the client is part of the whole circle, and the changes will also affect the product and the output.
So I think I was in a recent meeting where they talked about, these are the priorities of Canadians and where environment and sustainability stands right now. And I think it was like 17 on the list on the Prime Minister's agenda. So number one right now is affordability. And unfortunately, the environment has taken a back seat. I don't think that we have to give up on those things that, the efforts that the industry has made over the last number of decades. But I think that there's an opportunity when we talk about productivity to focus on waste instead of just greenwashing. There's been a lot of examples of that and also examples of successful projects that are truly sustainable or net zero, et cetera. But we still in construction expend a huge amount of waste because we purchase materials remotely, then bring it to site, and then cut it to measure on site, and there's a huge amount of waste. That waste is both reducing cost and creating less pollution and garbage. So that's an area that where we don't have to compromise and don't have to sort of increase costs, but still an area that we haven't really adequately addressed in our current practices.
Just to tell you a little bit about environmental sustainability, though, in that multi-unit residential is inherently more of a green product than sprawl product. It's obvious, but you also have to look at public transit actually contributes to affordability. So when you look at building on public transit, you are actually creating a more environmentally sustainable product because you're actually using public transit and you're also contributing to the affordability of that household. So some of these things do come hand in hand.
Will, last chance. Anything to add to that? All right. Well, that will conclude our question section of the panel. I wanted to take a chance to thank everybody for coming. And Brad, Julie, Yoon, I appreciate you guys all being here. Thank you very much.